the honor of announcing two of our speakers for the executive track. I was a member of the executive track committee, and we spent a lot of time in reviewing all the proposals and submissions with the goal of giving you speakers that are able to share information that maybe you've not obtained before at other conferences or through blogs or other ways that you learn. So with no further ado, I'm going to announce our first speaker, Charmaine McClarie. She's the president of McClarie Group, and her sessions Speak Up, Stand Out, Be Heard, and it's about being a great communicator. So Charmaine McClarie is an author, a C-suite advisor, keynote speaker, executive coach, and executive presence authority who helps leaders have their best year ever. She has worked with leaders in 27 industries across 5 continents. Charmaine and her work have been profiled in People, Forbes, Harvard Management Update, the London Times, and the New York Times. She is on the faculty as a leadership and communications expert at the University of Missouri, Kansas City Block School of Management, EMBA program, and is a visiting lecturer at the Smith College Executive Education Program. So with that, Charmaine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And it is such a pleasure to be here. During the midst of this pandemic, whenever I am gathered together with bodacious sisters and incredible allies, I just want to say thank you so much. Today, we are going to truly have a conversation and a dialogue about what it means to speak up, stand out, and be heard, and be recognized for what you do well so that it moves you forward and up, so that people of influence see and hear your contribution to the organization, so that you are not a well-kept secret. And you've had several speakers speak today about mentorship and about sponsorship and making sure that people are able to see you and to hear you. And when you leave here today, you're going to leave with some skills, some tools and strategies to ensure you're able to do just that. To ensure, again, that people see and hear your contribution, because I don't want you to be a well-kept secret. I want to ensure that if that feeling comes back again, you'll know exactly what to do to take yourself from the invisible to the very visible. Because you will be able to see new possibilities, because you're going to be able to look through a different lens. It's a lens of vision. And you'll be able to hear with a different ear, because you will listen for the headlines and you will listen for the must-make points. And you'll speak in that same way, because no one wants to be invisible. Now, I'm, again, so pleased to be here because during this sort of chaotic time, it is so vitally important for us to ensure that people are seeing us and hearing us. And it's also a wonderful time to be able to recraft our narrative, because I am a believer that if we do not define ourselves, others will, and their definition will inevitably be inadequate. And one of the things I want to not happen to you is this. And it's called technology.
We have got to cut costs, people. Ideas.
We could open an account on FedEx.com, save 10% on online express shipping.
Okay, how about this? We open an account on FedEx.com, we save 10% on online express shipping.
That is wonderful. You just said the same thing I said, only you did this.
No, I did this.
Makes all the difference.
Bingo.
That's good.
Right on the nose.
That's really good.
Well, one of the things that I want to make sure that does not happen to you is just that you are seen, heard, and that you're not that person that's invisible. And as I said, I'm going to share with you some skills, some tools and strategies to ensure that that does not happen, because we have all been there. In fact, I'm sure at home in your office that you are having laughter because you've all been there. You have felt absolutely invisible, and that is a horrible feeling. And so one of the things that was interesting in that video is that we assume that the person at the head of the table was in fact the person in charge, but he was the person who looked as though he was in charge and sounded as though he were in charge. And I want to make sure that, again, if all of the eyes and the ears go to that person, that they're able to turn around and come back to you. That you don't have to stand there and say, but that was my idea, but to be able to recapture their attention. And you're going to be able to do that because there's a process I created some years ago, and it's called the Executive Success Principles. And the very first principle is communicating the vision, because leaders communicate the vision and not the task. Because the vision is what's able to capture people's attention, it's what's able to engage people and able to influence people. So for example, when I speak about what it is that I do, I don't say that I'm an executive coach. I lead with what is my value proposition. What I want you to do is to lead with what is your value proposition. What I say is that I help smart people get promoted and communicate the big picture. Now, I've communicated all of that in a very short sentence, because you may have read last week that all executive coaches suck. And that would have been the definition of who I am. But we get to define ourselves. Again, if we don't define ourselves, others will, and their definition will inevitably be inadequate. And I want to make sure that yours speaks volumes about who you are. And during the midst of this time, as I said, you can recraft your vision, your narrative about who you are, and ensuring that you're able to really gain people's attention. I have a client who is currently on 2 corporate boards, publicly traded Fortune 100 boards. But in the beginning, when we began working together, she said, Charmaine, you know, I want to ensure that the street is able to see and hear me, that my team is able to perform. She was a new CEO at the time. And what we did is we really talked about how does she want to show up? Because all of this is about how do you want to show up? How do you want people to think, do, and feel about you? And in doing that, it's really about deciding what is that narrative. So I had her answer 3 very basic questions. How does she see herself? How does she want others to see her? And how do people see her? So I'm actually going to change the order. So how does she see herself? How do other people see her? And the most important is, how does she want to be seen? And answering those 3 very important questions is essential, because many times what we do is we show up, but we haven't decided how we want to show up. And now that we're virtual, it's really important to think about, how do I want people to see me? How do I want them to hear me? What is that narrative? So as you are speaking, which typically now is going to be through email or through Zoom or one of these platforms, is how do you want to show up, and how is that going to be different and even more powerful than when you were in the office? And as we're going through this presentation, as I said, it's going to be very interactive. I would love for you, participants, I would love for you to begin to identify questions, because I want this to be a session where it is not me as a talking head, but really you being involved and identifying situations that come up that you would like to have answered. So as I said, the communicating the vision, leaders that communicate the vision communicate what the results are. And I just heard a speaker earlier, and she was saying, she was mentioning about dishwashing, and she said when her children are washing dishes, she said, is it more important about having the dishes complete, or is it about how they're doing it? And again, it's going back to, what is the vision? If you're working on a project, what is the vision, and how do you want people what do you want them to think about the information? And many times what we do is we tell people everything we know about a subject, but not what's in it for them. And did I see a question here? So again, communicating the vision, because leaders communicate the vision and not the task. And how do you do that? Second is by speaking in headlines, because the headline is what captures the eye and the ear. And then the 3 must make points. I say there are 3 questions every audience has. Why should I listen? What's in it for me? And what do you want me to do about it? Those are the 3 questions that are most important, that are really vital. And then the 4th of those is about creating witnesses, because I say hard work without a witness is simply hard work, and who the hell needs that? People don't know whether it was done with a vision, they don't know if it was done with strategy, but you want to make sure that you are capturing people's attention and creating the witnesses, so that if you have a mentor, you now will have someone who will come to you to become your sponsor, because they will want to hand the baton of success to you. They will want to speak on your behalf when you are not in the room. And the 5th is don't audition for the part. Many times what we do is we audition for a role that we already have. You got it. They're paying you the big bucks for it. And so you stand up, you show up with a person of insight that has a perspective that you want to add. Because I always say that the meeting you need to attend is a meeting that cannot take place without your insight or your vision. If it can take place without those two, you don't need to be at that meeting. And the 6th is embodying your message, making sure that you're walking, talking, and acting the part. When I was introduced, if I were introduced and all of a sudden I started looking down and I couldn't look at you, I couldn't look at the screen, you would say, my gosh, I think that they made a mistake. Amanda made a mistake in the selection. And so we want to make sure that we're really carrying ourselves in a way that speaks volumes about who we are and what we want people to have as an expectation of our delivery. Because as women, many times we are underestimated and undervalued in terms of what we are going to bring to the table. And how we look and how we carry ourselves sends a very important message to that audience about how they should show up and how they should take in our information. And so that's very, very important. I'm also going to do another screen share real quickly. As I said, those are the 6 principles: communicating the vision, speaking in headlines, and you don't have to take copious notes because I will have all of this available for you later. Because I want you, again, to create the witnesses. If you're doing the hard work, like the proverbial tree that falls in the forest and no one hears it, no one but you, I want to make sure that people are hearing your message and that they are showing up and providing you the attention necessary. Now, I'm going to go back to my original slide, which was about the gentleman at FedEx. As I said, many of us have already been in that situation. And many times when that happens, what we think again is that it was our idea and how dare they. But there are a couple of things that you can do to bring the attention back to you. You can, one, say, you're right, I absolutely agree with you, it was a brilliant idea. And in fact, here are 3 things that we can do to bring this to fruition. And I'm going to lead that effort because the person who likely tried to take the spotlight has not thought about it, has not given it any attention, any real thought. And you really are the expert there. So thinking about, again, how do you want to position yourself? If you're the subject matter expert, you're going to be the leader. Like, how are you showing up? What's different about how you typically communicate to make sure you're getting people's attention? And do I have a question here?
I can read a question. I'm sorry, this is Dianthe Skirko. I'll read a question that came up. The first question is from Aaron Pangilian. I'm probably not saying that name right. My apologies. Question is on showing up. Does it matter so much what I wear during pitch meetings to investors when most tech bros just wear a hoodie?
Well, I'll say this. It does matter, and I'll tell you why it matters. It matters because you are asking for their investment. I'm working with a client right now on the 3rd round of funding, and it does matter. It matters the thinking about who is your audience and how might you need to look and dress for that audience. No, you don't need to come in a 3-piece suit, but you need to be polished because it communicates a lot about who you are, your level of detail. So yes, you want to ensure, particularly if you are a female, you're not going to showing up in the hoodie, as I used to say a lot with my clients would have corporate logo wear, is that it looks fine on the 6'5" gentleman because that's what they're expecting. But if you walk in there with that, it's going to look different. And so you want to think about the effect it has on your audience. There's a second question is, did you want to read that one, Dianthe?
Sure, I can read that. Women tend to create the culture within the organization. How do we get others to not focus on that only, but also the work and what they bring to the table beyond the culture?
One of the ways in which to do that is simply speak about what it is that's important. Speaking about the value that you bring and speaking about the results. So you're absolutely correct. The culture of this organization is important. But if we don't have results and we cannot bring value, it's all a moot point. And so really, I always say, use the language. So if someone says culture is important and you want to be associated with the results, then ensure you use the language of value and results. When someone says what you're not, I had a client, for example, she was not promoted and she was very upset about it. And I said, why weren't you promoted? And she said, because they said I wasn't strategic. Now, she was probably the most strategic person in the room. What we did is we began to shift her language. I said, listen for how people speak and what are the words and the language that people use, the language of leaders that perks people's ears and gets their attention. So what we began to do is she began to pepper her language with simply the word strategic. Based on my observation and based on my perspective, this is my recommendation. People are looking for you to have the answer or to answer the question, and making sure that you're using the language that follows suit with that.
Thank you, Charmaine. This is Jennifer, and we do have another question here. So regarding communicating the vision, how would you handle your manager when they like to control the how, say dishwashing versus hand washing, instead of empowering the team?
So finding out what is it that is, if the person wants to understand how you wash dishes, but that's not the most important aspect, saying that is important, but what's most important, again, shifting it back to the vision, what's most important is why we're taking this hill. And I want to make sure we're really clear and aligned on that. And we'll have an outline for the detail, because that person isn't going to sleep at night or is going to be concerned because the detail is not clarified. But really what's most important is getting everyone clear on the bigger picture and then making sure that you deliver that detail. So I understand your concern, or even asking them, is it the how more of interest to you than the delivery? And let's figure out how we can balance this, because I'll ensure that we're able to drive the results and deliver the results. But let's not focus on the how. I'll ensure that you have it, and I want to make sure we have alignment on the how. But really what I want to make sure is that we are able to take this to the end goal.
Thank you, Charmaine. Here's another question. What advice do you have for supporting the team when more senior team representatives misstate or inaccurately capture results and goals with external partners?
That's a tricky one, because if they're extracting the information, this is what I would say on that is, if they're taking the information and it is inaccurate and you know that it is going to damage the organization or damage how you guys move forward, is really taking the person aside and saying, what do you need so that you can speak confidently about this? How can we partner together so that I am either your wing person, or I am the lead on this, because I want to make sure that we're delivering what we need to deliver. Because everyone wants to be set up for success, but asking them, what do they need from you? Or that you've observed that this is one of the areas that's a challenge for us, and I want to make sure you have what you need so that you're able to speak confidently and accurately about what it is we're delivering. Does that make sense? Good. So I'm glad that you're asking these questions. Oh, perfect. Great. Thank you very much. So again, it's really thinking about how do you want people to see and to hear you? I'm going to go back to what I spoke about earlier in terms of speaking in headlines. When we think about watching the news in the evening, for any of you who still watch news on television, or if you think about listening to an event on television, one of the things that you hear in the very beginning is that newscaster or the person who is doing the interview, they are able to capture your attention and keep you to the end because of how they captured the vision. They told you what they were going to do. They may not deliver that until the end, but they set it up. And so what you want to do in your language is set up the success. Claim it in advance and let people know where you're going to take them. As I said today, you're going to leave with some skills, some tools, and strategies. And so some of those strategies are part of the ESP that I spoke about. But if you think about how you speak, what is the language of leaders? How do people see you? And how do you want to be seen? Those are three important questions I think that every executive needs to answer. And you need to get what I call is really the 411, really the truth. People that are going to really share even the tough feedback. So for example, if you see yourself as being very organized and the client who wasn't promoted, who I have to say now is promoted and runs all of North America and Canada, when she shifted how she spoke about her projects and about the initiatives, and when she stood up to speak, she ensured that one, she was really sharp, that she knew her information, but most importantly, she let them know this was essential and important for them to listen. And she said, my strategy is going to take us where we need to go in order for us to win. She was willing to step out in the faith that she had in herself and the faith that she had in her team in terms of their ability to deliver. So if we lead with what is our strength, we lead with what we see as the outcome, which is the vision, you will be able to engage and influence people as you are working through your project and or initiative. Because people are attracted to a winning team. They are attracted to people that win, and they want to be on board and they want to support that. So she was able to transform her career. One, because she showed up differently in terms of how she carried herself. She showed up differently in terms of how she dressed, and she showed up differently in terms of the language that she used. And she was then asked and handed the baton to take the next role. So that's really important. The other is the 3 must-make points. As I said earlier, that many times what we do is we tell people everything we know about a subject because we may be seen, particularly as women, as a subject matter expert. And so we'll go deep into detail. And I always say you begin with what is the bigger picture? What is the outcome that you want? And that's what you state first. Your detail can follow. Make sure you've got that information, but it is the bigger picture. If you tell me that you're taking me to Kansas, then we're going to Kansas. But if you tell me to just simply get in the car and ride with you, I may not want to do that. I want to know where there is. I want to know where the outcome is. What are we expected to deliver? And people will get on board when they know what it is that you're asking of them. The next, again, is creating witnesses. I said, again, hard work without a witness is simply hard work. So you want to have a mentor, you want to have a sponsor. And you want to have advocates before you enter the room. Because if you enter the room without advocates, you are not as well set up for success. And sometimes your advocates hit the room before you do, and they set the stage for what it is that you're going to deliver. Or they may be the person who says, Amanda, brilliant idea, excellent strategy. So you want those people in the room with you, particularly when you have something that's really high stakes. Very important, so that you're, again, creating witnesses and you're setting yourself and your team up and you're being the best advocate for your team because you now have people in the room that are able to remove barriers for you. And how do you make someone asked, how do you make your voice heard among others? Again, part of it is what is the insight what is it that you see and that you hear that other people are not, that is going to be a game changer? As I believe it was Catherine said this morning about who gets to be an innovator. So if you have an idea that is going to make the difference, that is what you need to speak about. And if you're in a room where people are loud and talking over you, at a certain point, particularly if you are a woman with a very soft voice and or smaller in stature, you simply can stand or you lean forward on the table and say, excuse me, this is important. It's vital information and I need your attention. Be quiet. You, meaning you, be silent in that moment and then begin to speak when all eyes are on you. And that requires practice because it doesn't feel natural. How can you learn to speak the language of leadership? You learn to speak the language of leadership by listening. What language, so when you're in a room, you will hear people and you will see people that everyone is listening to. What language do they use? Just be observant. And the people that aren't listened to, what language are they using and how do they show up? Getting an advocate, a partner who is willing to say to you and listening when you're in a meeting and saying, you know what I'd like? I'd like your feedback, your very direct feedback after a meeting to let me know how did I sound, how did I look, and what one thing do I need to do different so that I am heard differently. Those are the things that are really important. And I have a question for you, Dianthe. How much more time do we have?
It's 2:57 right now.
Ah, okay. Time is just about up. Again, this is all very important in terms of career trajectory. When I think about the executives that I've worked with over the years, these are simple, actionable, that can make a significant difference in the transformation of your career. Oh, wonderful. I am going to do a screen share real quick. And here we go. I have 6 essential steps to help you step into your spotlight. And I'm going to have you text me if you would later if this is of interest to you. And you can then have this information at your fingertips. As I said, you do not have to take copious notes because I have information that will be available to you afterwards. But what I want to see is I want you to define how you want to show up and how you want people to see you. And you define who you are and how you want the world to speak about you. So I'm going to give you this one short story. One of my clients, when we began working together, is that she said that she was the senior director of sales and marketing. And I said, that was really wonderful, but what do you do? And she said, that is what I do. I said, no, that's your title, but what do you do? And what we realized in a very short time is that she was responsible for the fastest growing market segment of that business. But what she did is she spoke about her title. And so I'm going to ask each and every one of you to not speak about your title, speak about your value, because your value speaks volumes. And this is a true story. Just like, it was like 2 days later, she's at the company, someone comes off the elevator bank, is lost, ask her, where was the CFO? Ask her what she knew, she said no. He said, what do you do? She says, I lead the fastest growing market segment of this business. Now she worked for a Fortune 10 company. He invited her to a reception that you could only attend if you were a vice president and above. And I told you she was senior director of sales and marketing. She shifted how she saw herself in that definition. She shifted how other people saw her. And she shifted how he saw her, because he felt she needed to be in the room with the other people that were vice president and above, which is why she was invited. I'm happy to say that she changed how how the world saw her. She leads a leadership institute for a Fortune 100 company now. If she had not changed how she saw herself and how she spoke about what she does, she would still be at the elevator bank saying, would you like floor number 3, floor number 4, or floor number 5? She defined her narrative and spoke very boldly about that narrative. And that way she was able to advocate better for herself, advocate better for her team, and speak more effectively about the business. So I'm going to have you do that. I'm going to challenge you to do that same thing. Shift how you speak about what it is that you do so you're speaking solely about its value. When you speak about the value, you're going to perk people's ears and their eye because they want to know about your success. If you need them to help you, you need to let them know what is it that they need to do? What is it you need them to do to help you bring things to fruition and to be successful, and so that they can be even more successful. I hope that the information that I've shared with you has been helpful, and I would love to hear from each and every one of you. Where are you and what do you want different? And you can reach me by email. I'd love to have that continue this conversation. But as I said when I began, I want to make sure that you're able to speak up, stand out, and be heard, and that people of influence see and hear your contribution. And how you speak, how you show up, how you define yourself is how that happens. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine. That was fantastic. Lots of love in the chat. And I know personally, I learned a lot from you. I had an honor of an executive coach here at VMware, and a lot of the things that you were sharing were things that I learned through my journey. So really appreciate you having, you taking the time to join us here. We're gonna move to our next speaker now. Amy Kardel is Vice President, Strategic Workforce Relationships at CompTIA. And she's gonna talk about how to win a rebellion of one, an insider's guide to advancing your tech career. Amy Kardel became a true technologist as a library assistant during her college years when she developed a language translation business using software. Later, she built upon this entrepreneurial spirit by co-founding and leading the IT services firm Clever Ducks with her spouse. Their chain of business successes led Amy to a seat on the board of directors at CompTIA, the world's leading IT trade association, including 2 terms as chairwoman. Along this journey of continuous training and learning, she also earned a law degree. Today, Amy serves as CompTIA's Vice President, Strategic Workforce Relationships, developing practical solutions that intend to transform the tech industry by helping its workforce transform itself. So Amy, I'm turning it over to you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much. We'll be switching screens here in just a moment, and great, now you can see me. Nice to meet you. I'm an engineer's daughter, and my dad had a big hobby of boat building. I grew up in San Luis Obispo, California. Morro Bay is my home port, and my dad was the kind of guy who, if he saw a boat he liked, he would go home and build it. And in no small way, the first boat that I remember building was when I was, we started before I was in kindergarten. It was a 38-foot schooner, and it started in the wood shop. And so my earliest days were realizing a vision and seeing something done that most people don't. We grew up with a lot of people who made boats but never finished them. You know, there were a lot of boat makers in Morro Bay, just sort of skeleton boats and people who talked about things. But the trick in life is seeing what can be and having the discipline to make that happen. And that's a real revolution of one. So when you're working in a wood shop, you really have to have first that what do you want to make question and see it so compellingly that you want to do it. Then you rely on a blueprint, and then you get down to hard work. And one of my earliest memories really is that wood shop. So I'm going to share a deck with you now. Okay. Thank you. And tell you a little bit more about that. Okay. So having that vision of what you want to build in the wood shop was my first memory. And it's a little bit like working with technology. I have these great memories of a long planer, like you see in this image, as long as my dad's forearm, you know, being pushed, a joiner planer, and making these great curly cues of wood. And that was a step in the process of making something. And I think that stuck with me and really shaped what I ended up doing with my life, which is making things. So I'm uniquely qualified to speak to you about changing status quo and leading a rebellion. my first real experience with entrepreneurship came when I went to college. Went away to Berkeley, was a work study student here in Dwinell Hall. And I was in the foreign language library in the back corner on the 5th floor. Well, maybe it was the 4th floor. The building's floors don't line up with the elevators and stairs. So many people get lost in that building. It's nicknamed Dwinell Hall. And I had a very understanding boss. She just basically let me sit at the front desk and study. But one of the interesting things that really came out of that job was during the .com era, people were calling, looking for people to translate software into French, English, German, Spanish. And so they must have thought, well, who can I call? Well, I'll call one of the big colleges and I'll call the foreign language library. So we get these calls quite frequently. Can someone translate this software into Spanish, et cetera? And pretty soon I was handing out these opportunities. And then I realized, wait, these guys are struggling with getting the translatables out of the code and dealing with all the formatting, and I should just run this like a kingpin. So my first foray into technology really came from realizing there was an opportunity and being opportunistic, and seeing something that wasn't yet. And I was a kid who needed to make money, wanted to make money, liked to travel. And so I got into that, and I got more and more into tech. And my boyfriend was studying computer science. And while I was busy doing software localization, he was doing a lot of side hustles, consulting, automating, securing PC networks, which were really new at the time. And that innovation was not uncommon in large business, but in the SMB space, certainly new. And that company now continues. But at the time, people thought, what are you doing? You're a computer science student. You go work for anybody. You've got, you know, the golden ticket, basically. And why would you want to charge a flat rate, not an hourly rate for that service? All these kind of crazy ideas. Everybody thought we were just really not taking the normal path and therefore crazy. And so one of the things I've learned is when you get that kind of feedback from people that says, I don't understand what you're doing, but the market is giving you feedback like, yes, you're valuable. Question the feedback from people who don't understand what's going on, because the market is telling you something. So that company now continues, CleverDucks, and it's been an interesting journey because in 2007, we changed the name to CleverDucks from Computer Network Services. I realized that the first name was really bad marketing. No one could find us, and it was sort of boring. So in the process of growing that company, I got very involved with the Global Trade Association, CompTIA. And there I served on various volunteer committees and eventually ended up on the board of directors and just finished 6 years as the chairwoman of the board globally. And going into that role, one of the most memorable things I have on an emotional level is the realization that even though I came from a small company, less than 20 employees, I was someone who had hired, fired, bought a building, done a TI, developed all contracts, had a 360 view of all operations in the business, that I was really blessed with a broad background. And during the course of doing that, I decided to go to law school, take the California bar exam, because I thought the next step up in administration was really being a ninja lawyer and never being misled by a contract again. So my aha moment was, even though you can come from somewhere small, you can have a perspective that can make a big difference. That's a lot like being a member of a corporate trainee program where you rotate through different departments. And that's really possible in smaller organizations sometimes, and can bring a lot of benefits to you and understanding how things connect. And that's what I do in my current role. My biggest aha from the CompTIA side was really that problems around the world in technology, training, and pipeline for workforce are very similar. And so I learned not only something personal, but something universal. And that leads to my current role, where I'm working to connect business, education, and government to create a bigger pipeline into IT careers. That's my title, VP of Strategic Workforce Relationships. And being able to bridge these worlds and organizations is a relationship game. But you have to know enough about all of those entities and how they function to tie it together. And sometimes people have a really vague understanding of what you do. What is a trade association for IT industry? You know, we have a certification business. We help our industry in various ways. And so aligning with people who are climbing the same mountain with different resources and solving the same problem, namely a shortfall in the supply of qualified workers for technology, and really doing that with a focus in my role on entry level with diversity and inclusivity is a place I connect with people across the country. So that's where I've decided to lead my rebellion of one. Of course, we all know the research that shows that women are underrepresented in business leadership, 10% of management positions in studies by University of Michigan, and data from McKinsey show that 1 in 5 women says they're the only woman in the room at work. I know that feeling. And of course, in tech, it's not very different. We see the same thing. So if women are isolated in the tech workplace, how can they blaze new pathways in positions of leadership in the technology world? I advocate, again, for being a rebel. So being a rebel is sort of an interesting dichotomy. You have individual grit, at the same time you have collective consciousness. So an inside and an outside force. You have self-awareness that's required, at the same time as situational awareness, a broader perspective. You have to hear your inner voice and harmonize with outer language. It's not something you can do by yourself. You have to be a crusader. You really need to think about what makes your message positive to compel others to join you. You'll be listened to if you bring value to the table. Doesn't mean you need to be Pollyanna-ish, but you need to focus on how you create value for the organization and your stakeholders. That doesn't mean you can't be critical, but it does mean you need to come with a solution, an opportunity that adds values to people's lives and their business. That will allow you to coalesce support. If you're forward-looking, constructive, and think about what's scalable, what can be done right now to solve our problem, you'll be welcomed by anyone, and you won't be rebelling against many for long. You need to be a visionary. You need to be able to express your vision clearly and concisely. And I recommend you do this in writing, not only verbally. If you can share this message in as many mediums as possible, you'll be better for it. Make a podcast, make a video, write a blog article, really articulate that vision, have it shared by others. This is a hard thing to do, but it lets you really divide the problem up, be specific, and conquer. Your message could be as simple as, for example, I want to coalesce the team so they understand their roles and responsibilities, and we can operationalize with a high level of trust. That could be an example, and you could articulate how you're going to do that. You need to be strategic. So this is kind of thinking like a general. It needs to create a vision that the team can operationalize around. You know, you have to communicate that, the strategy of a big picture. And there's a high level plan to achieve these goals, often in the face of great uncertainty, right? So there's 2 phases to that. There's the formulation phase and a phase where you'll need to implement. Strategic planning, of course, is that formulation phase, and strategic thinking helps with that. And how you implement it comes back to that situational awareness. So apply things you know in a dynamic system. Imagine alternatives. It's creative, but we all have finite resources, and probably now more than ever. So every choice you'll make is a trade-off. If you go east, you can't go west. If you spend this dollar here, you can't spend this dollar there, or that minute here, or that minute there. So it's really a chance to maximize your resources. But expect those trade-offs. Of course, you also have to be a diplomat. These are some of the many hats you'll need to wear, right? You cannot be isolated. You have to have allies. I love Charmaine spoke to that in the last half hour. Those allies will help you validate your ideas. You know, if you're a research scientist, you really live on the currency of who quotes your ideas. You know, Google Scholar keeps track of that. And the value of someone else referencing your idea is so great in our world as well. And that'll shift momentum in a new direction and allow social proof for your ideas to be carried forward and listened to. So you need allies. You need to be a communicator who can convince allies to be part of your cause. And of course, allies don't have to look like you. Now you have to execute. You have to do the thing. It's easy to talk and not execute, but you really You need to hone your skills, be ready to step up when it's go time, and be ready to do it any day. And you can do that by practice. Really, practice is everything. You have to sharpen those skills. A couple tips are you could volunteer for something hard. You could really look right now, even if you don't have a role leading people, what could you do to lead people in a way outside of work or in a committee at work, something that isn't exactly connected with your role. If you want to have an international footprint in your future role, why don't you take an international volunteer job now? Look for something that aligns with what you can want to be that you can do right now. You'll find those things if you look for them. You know, we also take our skills for granted that are natural and that we're good at. You know, people will tell me, oh, you're so good at putting people at ease and connecting with new people. And I think, really? I don't see that in myself. Well, that's because it's natural to me. You don't even notice what you're good at. You might be really good at strategic thinking and not even realize that's a huge strength. So step back, ask others what they see as a strength in you, and stress those natural gifts. You know, it's an important thing to play to your strengths. We all talk about that. But how should I say this? It's important to build on those natural strengths too. You should rely on what you've been given and build it to be even better. Of course, there'll be skills you're not as good at, and you can compensate for those, but really put more focus on what you're good at and make that great. So the trick is sharpening your tactical skills to figure out what you're gifted in. Strengthen that and your organizational benefit, and so will your career. The only way you get better at things is to do them. And the only way to tackle things that are going to grow you is to do things that are hard. Those things are public speaking, those things are interviews, those things are presentations. And you have to do lots and lots of them to become more comfortable with it. So step outside your comfort zone, do something that's hard, look for an opportunity to add value, step up and practice. And you can do that now, no matter where you are, no matter what role you have in any organization, or even if you're not in an organization right now, because there is always an opportunity to look for a way to make things better and improve yourself. It's been a pleasure speaking to you about how to lead a rebellion of one, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. And everyone, please post your questions in the Q&A box so Amy can start answering them.
Hi, Amy. We've got a question for you. How can you apply these ideas to shift outside the area in which you've been working?
Okay, so if you're, for example, in marketing and you want to get into a more technical role or something in a different department, I think that goes back to that volunteering to be involved in things. There's always ways to be cross-functional within your existing roles. And I think if you express that, if you verbalize that interest, and if you look for ways to do it, you'll find those opportunities. It's not going to be necessarily easy. You might not be able to find it within your organization. I hope you do, but if you can't, think about ways you could do that through a professional service club. Maybe it's Rotary International, maybe it's Women's Leadership Organization, but look for those opportunities to serve as treasurer if you want to get financial skills, or to serve in a marketing capacity for something volunteer, because you'll find a way to get those skills and then be able to bring that back to the place you're compensated for your work, I hope.
Looks like we have a bunch of folks that are really tired after a long day of
Here's another question that just came up.
Coming in. There we go.
How do you tell that it's time for you to be a rebel?
What a great question. How do you tell when it's time for you to stand up and challenge something? Well, the times I've felt that where it was time to go against conventional thinking and really put a manifesto out to change things was when my inner voice told me, hey, there's an opportunity over here. We're not maximizing our resources. Or, hey, this isn't quite right. There's something we could do better. there's an inner, if you're true to yourself, I think you'll feel times in your career where you realize, I think we can do better and I want to lead a change. Now, do you have to be a leader in position to do that? Not necessarily, that's my point. I think you can feel that and share that in a positive way, no matter what position you are in the company.
Amy, a really interesting question from Laura Rosales here. How can you get out of the comfort zone when your environment is requesting you remain in it?
Wow, that's interesting. How can you get out of your comfort zone, even if that's the company culture to stay in your comfort zone? I've seen that before, you know. I think there are places where that is the de facto norm, that everybody's pretty comfortable and just staying there is part of it. But there's going to be pockets in that organization that don't think that's good enough, because it's not going to be good enough for someone. And usually you'll find that there's going to be a place where you'll find someone who wants to make a change as well. They may not share it openly though, because it would be going against the grain perhaps of leadership. So I think going outside your comfort zone in that case is going to be something you have to feel out and do, again, back to that positive mission. Find something you can rally around that's going to bring more value to the organization, and that'll get everybody's attention.
Here's another question. What tricks and techniques did you use to balance owning and running a business while attending law school?
Yeah, I didn't tell you I had 4 kids too. It's an interesting thing to juggle, isn't it? Busy people get more done is just part of the basic rules of the universe, I think. It's sort of like the more space you have, the more you fill your garage. The less time you have, the more efficiently you can pack that garage too. I turned off television. That is my #1 tip. I haven't turned it back on much. I still, of course, read many newspapers and will watch movies and things, but to me, the #1 time suck, if you look at America's budget for time in the week, is television, and doesn't add a lot of value. So you can win back several hours a day by turning that off and focus more on your family and the hours you do have, and more on prioritizing. I think the other thing is good, clean living. You can eat well, exercise well, and get enough sleep. And if you are blessed with good health, to really focus on operating that opportunity you have of 24 hours a day to its maximum capacity. Good, clean living goes a long way. And those basics always play out. And then the other thing is, I think you can't do it alone. I have really good support at home from a strong partner. And if you don't have that, you have to find a way to create that, especially if you've got kids that you're juggling too. You can do everything, you just can't do it all at once. I waited till my kids were a little older. So they were in high school when I went back to law school.
Thanks, Amy. Another great question for you here. Our manager asks for inputs from the team, but he doesn't actually listen to them. How do you not sound like a broken record or an unwelcomed rebel?
That's a big challenge. You asked the tough questions here. Wow. You know, you work with it as hard as you can, and you talk to others, and you build coalition. I think if you're not the only voice, you'll have better success. If this is a recurring event that just won't change, maybe you need to look at changing where you are in an organization. You know, that much, to me, if I had a leader that I really couldn't get alignment with or find a way to bring things forward over a longer period of time, years, I would be looking for another opportunity. But I think first, of course, try to build those allies and bring that mission with value forward. But if they don't see it, maybe that is a sign on the wall. There are definitely organizations and places where status quo is not going to change, and maybe it's a time for you to look for an opportunity elsewhere.
Thank you. Another question. What are some of the tactics you have for when you have a vision and people agree with it, but they don't have the time or resources to help?
Oh, yeah. So if something will create value, it's easier to find resources for it, right? If it's revenue generating, we can often find a way to push things forward. So I hope that your organization would look at that as an opportunity worth investing in and provide resources. Of course, the existing team might be strapped, but it's okay to ask for support if you can make a business case for it. And I would start with that. And it might not be from the usual suspects. You know, in this pandemic, my first pandemic, probably your first pandemic, inside CompTIA, we've seen a lot of innovation. And now is a good time to think about things like this, because we've seen people who would have been maybe busy with parts of the business that aren't as busy right now being shifted to others. So you might have an opportunity, especially right now, to say, look, this is the business case, just a very brief plan, you know, less than 1 page. This is the objective. This is how we're going to do it. This is the resources needed, and this will be the outcome. You might find that someone says, hey, we've got people over here who aren't as busy as they used to be, and maybe we can shift them over. So I think, again, put it on paper, put numbers to it, share that vision, and don't expect a no, expect a yes, and see what happens.
I love that. Expect a yes. I'm taking notes on that myself, and I love it. Another question. So are you, can you recommend any training or books for building up skill sets?
Oh, I wish I could. Charmaine, can you put some in the chat? I think, you know, I read a lot of biographies. I love reading biographies. I just finished reading one on, well, there's so many I like. I think you learn stories from people's biographies, and I just read one about Hedy Lamarr. She was an actress and also invented some things during World War II. Super interesting. I think you learn a lot about reading stories of people's lives. That's why I told you a little bit about my life, too. So I like to think about examples in leadership from biography. I'm leading one right now also about Mrs. Perkins. She founded the Department of Labor in a big way, and was on Roosevelt's cabinet. Super interesting woman. So if you can find examples in history, and I mean, to be a leader in the 20s and 30s as a woman, she's amazing. So look for those biography moments, but you know, there's some really great classics on building skills. I still really like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits book. I mean, that is so great. If you haven't read that yet, it's probably an oldie but a goodie in many people's minds. I would go back and read that. And then he had another book called The Power of Trust, and says that business happens at the speed of trust. And a lot of the questions we talked about here came back to trust. Maybe take a look at that book too. I liked his books a lot. I don't think they're that popular anymore, but they were definitely goodies.
Well, I see a question here that I would love the answer to. So the question is about status quo, bringing industry best practices. This person wants to know basically, how do you up your rebel game?
Wow, how do you up your rebel game? So I guess the question really is, the status quo of what you're in a current company is different than what you've learned in the past and where you want to go. And sometimes they're even at odds with each other, right? Look for how the business generates value. I think one thing people forget is it's not just value for your company, it's value for your customers' companies, if you have customers, or it's value for your consumer in a different way. It's not just value for the first customer, it's a valuable for the customer's customer. Am I making sense with that? So for example, in an IT consulting company, our clients would be a hospital, right? So whatever value we're adding to the hospital is great. They pay us for that. But if we can find a way to make the patients of that hospital, or the doctors in that hospital, or the stakeholders in that hospital have more value from that hospital, in a sense, our clients' clients, then I can change things bigger, because that client is going to generate more value to pay me more, and that gets attention. So that's a way to look at shifting status quo. If you're looking at some process that affects that value chain, you'll see more opportunity if you can think past just your customer and into your customer's customer. Now, if you're talking about a culture or a practice, kind of a modernization revolution, where, you know, someone, like an organization, maybe stuck in a time warp and hasn't been talking to peers, another value is to not only have, if you've seen that inside of how your company could advance, it's really important to get other people in the chain to see that. And mastermind groups are very valuable for that. I've seen a lot of CEOs and CEO groups or CTO groups where if the more people are plugged into a peer network that can see outside their own organization, they'll be able to look in a mirror and look at themselves with new perspective. I would recommend that as well.
So let's go for another question. What's your best advice if you have a manager who is ineffective, the team relies more on you than the person in charge, and who puts their name on your work? If you are doing their job, how to carefully and effectively communicate that upward?
Wow, that's a really tough one, isn't it? First of all, do the job. I mean, do it so well that people notice. You know, be so good, do such a good job that they can't live without you is always great advice. And I think the people you're managing can carry that message forward as well for you. And if you really are taking the load off someone, it will be noticed. It's too hard to hide now. I think back in the day, maybe people could hide. I actually once had an employee say to me, you know, I just don't want to work here. I want to go somewhere where I can hide. And I said, yeah, today is your last day, like we've already talked about, because there's really, if your light is shining so bright and you're helping so many people as a basically de facto manager, how can that be hidden? I hope it can't. But tactfully sharing that in your organization, there should be some review structure that lets you, through the channels of command, get that message up. There must be a 360 review at some point of that person. But I would not be a complainer. I would be positive in the message. Like, I'm so glad I have the opportunity to lead this team and manage this team, even if it's in a de facto way, and expect people to say, isn't that great? And then notice what's really going on.
I know that there are more questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Everyone, please share your thanks and love for our wonderful speakers. We now have about a half-hour break before our final keynote with Laura Dern. I know her from watching some shows like HBO, Big Little Lies, so I'm pretty excited to see what she has to say about life and what we'll learn. So thanks everyone for attending the exec track at WT2, and see you in about half an hour. Take care, and thank you again, our speakers, Amy and Charmaine.
Thank you.
Thank you.